In the parable of the sower, Jesus describes a farmer scattering seeds in a field. Some of these seeds land on stony ground. The seeds represent the gospel in our hearts. And a stony heart is one that receives the gospel with joy, but when that person's faith is challenged, they get offended. And the plant dies before it really has a chance to take root. Later on, Jesus tells his disciples that in the last days, many shall be offended and betray and hate each other. And these people will even deliver up the saints or disciples of Christ to be afflicted and killed. Even Isaiah speaks of the end times and how people will make a man an offender for a word and lay a snare for him to trap him. Obviously, getting offended is a big problem. And anyone with eyes to see can discern that we are in such times. All you have to do is look at politics or the media or social media. So how can we avoid going down that path? In this series, we're going to explore how language affects our thoughts, our actions, and ultimately our destinies. Today, I want to share with you some offensive language that my family has learned to replace with holier words. But don't worry, I'm not going to be cussing at you in this video. What I call offensive language is actually what business and life coach Steve Chandler refers to as victimese. In his research, Chandler noticed that people who are successful speak what he calls Ownish, and those who aren't as successful speak victimese. And part of victimese is what I term offensive language because it's spoken by people who are constantly offended. These are people who blame everyone else for whatever's going on. This uses words like you always, or they never, everyone, always, no one, ever, and then fill in the blank. Have you ever used that kind of language? Or do you know somebody who talks that way? Because I know I have talked that way in my life and I am constantly tempted to. But Ownish does exactly the opposite. It accepts at least partial responsibility for whatever circumstance is present, as indicated by the use of the word we. Can we look at this differently? Is there another way that we can try to do this? In my family, Ownish means that we are responsible for our own feelings. I ask my kids this all the time, who's responsible for your feelings? And they begrudgingly tell me I am. But it's true. We have control over how we respond to any situation, whether to get offended or to own it. At the same time, while Ownish recognizes that we are responsible for our own thoughts and feelings, it also acknowledges that we have no control over other people's words or actions. But that doesn't mean we're powerless. Whenever we turn any given situation around and look inward for the solution rather than outward, we are empowered. We can now change and thus create change. Isn't that amazing to think that we always have that kind of power? It almost seems too simple, doesn't it? That simply being mindful of the words that we use day in and day out can so drastically impact our lives and ultimately our destinies. But that's exactly what James talked about when he was speaking of offensive language. He said that a small bit in a horse's mouth can guide the entire body, and that a small helm, when guided by a good pilot, can steer even a great ship safely to its destination, even when facing severe opposition from fierce winds. Brothers and sisters, fierce winds and intense heat and rocky soil may tempt you to use offensive language, and that may lead to you hating others and even feeling justified in trapping them or ensnaring them with that language. But that is not what Jesus taught us to do. This week, I invite you to be mindful of words like you and they and always and never, and replace them with I, we, And the thought of how am I contributing to this problem? How can I be a part of the solution? And then be willing to give up whatever need you might have to control other people's words and actions, and give that over to the wise pilot, to the master of the wind and waves himself, even Jesus Christ.